He stood in the courtroom, pen in hand, a smirk curling his lips as he signed the divorce papers, confident his prenup would shield his fortune, until the judge's words froze the room. The prenuptial agreement was never legally filed. What followed unraveled a meticulously laid plan, exposing secrets, betrayal, and a financial empire teetering on the edge of collapse. Jonathan Blake stood at the polished oak table in the courtroom, his tailored suit pristine, his posture relaxed. At 42, he was a man who commanded attention, sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, and an air of unshakable confidence. He flipped through the divorce papers with a casual flick of his wrist, his signature flowing across the page with the ease of someone signing a grocery receipt. A low chuckle escaped his lips, barely audible, but enough to make his soon-to-be ex-wife, Emily, stiffen across the room. She sat with her attorney, her face a mask of controlled fury, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The courtroom, a sterile space of muted grays and heavy silence, seemed to hold its breath. Jonathan's amusement wasn't subtle. He'd spent months, years even, ensuring this moment would be his triumph. The prenuptial agreement, signed before their marriage 10 years ago, was his fortress. It guaranteed Emily would walk away with next to nothing, a mere fraction of the wealth he'd amassed as a real estate tycoon. His empire, built on luxury developments and high-stakes investments, was worth over $300 million, and he wasn't about to let her claim a dime more than the prenup allowed, a modest $2 million settlement, chump change in his world. As he signed, his eyes flicked toward Emily, and the smirk widened. She'd fought for more, of course, but he knew the law was on his side. Or so he thought. Emily, 38, sat with her shoulders squared, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her attorney, Rachel Harper, a seasoned litigator with a reputation for tenacity, leaned in to whisper something, but Emily's gaze remained fixed on Jonathan. She'd spent a decade as his wife, navigating his world of galas, boardrooms, and calculated charm. She'd been the perfect partner, supportive, poised, always a step behind to let him shine. But now, as the marriage crumbled, she wasn't the naive 28-year-old who'd signed that prenup. She'd learned his game, his tactics, and she'd hired Rachel for a reason. The judge, a silver-haired woman in her 60s named Margaret Ellison, adjusted her glasses and reviewed the documents before her. Her reputation for fairness was well known, but so was her intolerance for theatrics. Jonathan's chuckle hadn't gone unnoticed, and her lips pressed into a thin line as she scanned the paperwork. The room was quiet except for the faint rustle of pages and the occasional cough from a court clerk. Emily's legal team had submitted a motion contesting the prenup's terms, arguing that Jonathan's financial disclosures at the time of signing were incomplete. Rachel had spent months digging into his business dealings, unearthing inconsistencies that suggested he'd undervalued his assets to limit Emily's claim. But Jonathan's attorney, Victor Lang, a bulldog in a three-piece suit, had dismissed the motion as a desperate ploy. The prenup, he argued, was ironclad. "Your Honor," Victor began, rising from his seat, the prenuptial agreement was signed by both parties with full consent and legal counsel present. My client's financial disclosures were accurate at the time, and any attempt to challenge the document now is baseless. His voice was smooth, practiced, carrying the weight of someone who'd won countless battles in rooms like this. Rachel stood to counter, her tone measured but firm. "Your Honor, we've provided evidence that Mr. Blake's disclosures omitted significant assets, including offshore accounts and shell companies that were active at the time of the marriage. The prenup's validity hinges on full transparency, which was not provided." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression one of mild boredom. He'd heard it all before, Emily's accusations, her team's attempts to paint him as a schemer. He trusted Victor to handle it. The prenup had been drafted by the best attorneys money could buy, reviewed meticulously, and signed in a lawyer's office with witnesses. He'd covered every angle. Or so he believed. Judge Ellison raised a hand, silencing both attorneys. "I've reviewed the submitted documents," she said, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made Jonathan sit up slightly. There's a procedural issue that needs addressing before we proceed with the terms of the prenup. Jonathan's smirk faltered, just for a moment. A procedural issue? Victor's brow furrowed, but he maintained his composure, glancing at his client as if to reassure him. Emily, on the other hand, leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. Rachel's expression remained unreadable, but her fingers tapped lightly on the table, a telltale sign she sensed something shifting. The prenuptial agreement, Judge Ellison continued, appears to have been notarized and signed by both parties. However, upon review of the court's records and the county clerk's filings, it seems the document was never officially filed with the appropriate authorities. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jonathan's head snapped toward Victor, his eyes wide. Victor's jaw tightened, but he quickly recovered, standing to address the judge. Your Honor, that must be a clerical error. The agreement was executed properly, and we can provide documentation of the notarization. Judge Ellison cut him off. Mr. Lang, notarization is not the issue. The agreement was never registered with a county clerk's office, as required by state law for it to be legally binding in a divorce proceeding. Without that filing, the prenup is, at best, a private contract with no enforceable weight in this court. The room seemed to tilt for Jonathan. His confident facade cracked, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. Emily's lips parted slightly, her breath catching as she processed the judge's words. Rachel, ever the professional, kept her face neutral, but her eyes gleamed with the realization of what this meant. Without a legally binding prenup, the divorce would proceed under state law, which mandated an equitable distribution of marital assets. In a marriage as long as theirs, with assets as vast as Jonathan's, Emily could be entitled to half, or more, of his fortune. Jonathan's mind raced. This couldn't be right. He'd paid top dollar for his legal team, for the notary, for every detail to be perfect. He remembered the day they signed the prenup, Emily hesitant but ultimately agreeing after her attorney reviewed it. The notary, a quiet man named Harold Grayson, had stamped the document in his office. Jonathan had walked away feeling untouchable. How could it not have been filed? Your Honor, Victor said, his voice betraying a hint of urgency, we request a recess to verify the filing status and address this oversight. An oversight? Rachel interjected, standing again. Your Honor, this is not a minor clerical error. The failure to file the prenup undermines its enforceability. My client has been operating under the assumption that this document was valid, only to discover now that it holds no legal weight. This changes the entire framework of the divorce settlement. Judge Ellison nodded, her expression unyielding. I agree, Ms. Harper. The absence of a filed prenup shifts this case significantly. We will proceed with the assumption that no valid prenuptial agreement exists unless Mr. Blake's counsel can produce evidence of proper filing. In the meantime, I'll hear arguments on the division of marital assets under state law. Jonathan's chuckle was long gone. His face flushed, a mix of disbelief and anger. He leaned toward Victor, his voice low but sharp. How did this happen? You told me this was handled. Victor's response was a tight-lipped whisper. It was. I'll find out what went wrong. Across the room, Emily allowed herself a small exhale, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in months. She'd spent years feeling trapped in Jonathan's world, her contributions to their marriage dismissed, her sacrifices overlooked. The prenup had been a constant weight, a reminder that she'd entered the marriage with little and would leave with less. Now the playing field had shifted. She glanced at Rachel, who gave her a subtle nod, as if to say, We've got this. The hearing continued, but Jonathan's focus was elsewhere. His mind churned through the implications. Half his empire, his properties, his investments, his carefully curated legacy, could be at stake. He thought back to the notary, Harold Grayson, a man recommended by Victor's firm. Had there been a mistake? Or something worse? Jonathan's instincts, honed by years of navigating cutthroat deals, told him this wasn't an accident. Someone had dropped the ball, or worse, someone had played him. As the judge called a recess, Jonathan's attorney scrambled to make calls, demanding records from the county clerk's office. Emily and Rachel stepped into the hallway, their conversation hushed but purposeful. Emily's voice was steady, but there was a fire in her eyes. "He thought he had me cornered," she said softly. "He thought I'd walk away with nothing." Rachel placed a hand on her arm. "He underestimated you. And now he's paying for it."